Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Welcome to another video. Disclaimer: none of the event mentioned are true. No idol is being harmed in the video, and any idol have any negative role. Let's start another part of our video. The banquet had become a nightmare, a theater of fear and accusation, and the night would be remembered not for its grandeur, but for the violent fall of a queen struck down at her own table. As Hyun withered and retched, the court watched with horror, their whispers like snakes slithering through the halls. Some said it was divine punishment for her jealousy. Others muttered that Minhee must have been the cause, for who else could benefit for the queen's reign? Ministers with hidden agendas leaned into the chaos, already plotting how to turn this disaster to their advantage. But Jungkook's voice thundered above all the hall, above the ministers, commanding silence, ordering that no accusation be made until the truth was uncovered. His fury shook the hall as he swore that whoever had dared to poison his queen would face death. Yet, in the shadows of that promise, Minhe's heart clenched with fear, for she knew too well how easily suspicion would fall upon her. And so the night ended not in harmony but in ruin. The queen carried to her chambers, her body weakened and trembling. The banquet dismissed in shame, the guests whispering of trickery in the royal household. The air of the palace grew with suspicion. In white and red, Jungkook's hands stained with the memory of his wife's vomit and tears, trembled with rage and helplessness. Minhee, though innocent, felt the weight of 100 accusing eyes pressing upon her soul. And somewhere in the unseen corners of the palace, the true hand behind the poison meal waited, watching, ready to strike again. The palace had not known true silence until the night after the poisoned banquet. It was a silence of fear, of suspicion, heavy in the air, of whispers swallowed back before reaching the tongue. Lady Hyun, though saved from death by the desperate hand of the physicians, lay weak in her chambers, her body trembling with every breath, her pride shattered by the humiliating scene of her collapse before the court. And as she recovered in bed, it was the servants, those ever watchful eyes and ears of the palace, who carried stories like embers in a forest of dry leaves. It was the Lady Minhee, they whispered behind doors, over basins of water in the dark corners of the kitchens. She was jealous of the queen's power, jealous of her crown, jealous that the king still spends every hour in her chamber while the queen is ignored. One servant swore she had seen Minhee pass the kitchens that afternoon. Another claimed that she had overheard her muttering about being overshadowed. Another invented entirely that she had seen Minhee slip a wheel into the queen's goblet. Lies grew like weeds, and soon enough the court was crawling with them. Ministers nodding to one another, concubines hiding smicks behind silk fans, guards exchanging glances heavy with doubt. It did not matter that there was no proof, no witness, no logic to the claim. What mattered the most was the Minhee was a rival, and the throne in the queen's side, who received the love that was meant for the king's rightful wife, and in why made for a far easier explanation that foreign assassin hierarchy among the nobles. Jungkook heard the whispers of gods. No good king could remain deaf when venom filled his palace walls. At first he dismissed them with rage, shouting down ministers who dared bring such accusations before him, warning the servants that spreading falsehoods would be met with lashes. But as the days dragged on and the whispers grew louder than the fading, even his own parents leaned into his ears, their faces grave, insisting that the peace of the palace demanded some gestures, some assurance to Lady Hyun that she remained honored, that the court was not blind to her humiliation. The nobles already talk of how you humiliate your queen, his father said, stern as steel. You let a concubine outshine her, and now, when the queen nearly dies at your own table, you protect that concubine still? A king must not be blinded by love. His mother's words were sharper, cutting into him where his heart bled. Your weakness for that girl will destroy you. Perhaps she did not pour the poison with her own hands. But her jealousy is plain to every soul in this palace. If you do not command her to bow, to beg forgiveness, the noble will call you a fool, and the people will whisper of a cursed household. Do you want? You want your reign remembered for scandal or for strength? Their voices drilled into him until even Jungkook, who knew Minhee's heart as pure as his own, felt the weight of doubt pressing against his chest. Meanwhile, Minhee herself lived in torment. She had been at the banquet. She had been seen Lady Hyun collapse, and though she had rushed for physicians, though she had cried out until her throat burned, she now found herself shadowed by suspicions at every turn. Servants began to gossip about her. They averted their eyes when she passed. Courtiers whispered too loudly behind her back. Guards stood stiff when she walked to the corridors. She tried to hold her head high to remind herself that her heart was innocent. But even her maids, girls who had once adored her, now looked at her with caution in their eyes. She felt the ground slipping from beneath her, and yet when Jungkook came to her chamber, she saw the storm in his eyes, the battle between love and duty, and she knew the pressure was crushing him as well. One evening, when the palace was quiet, he came to her, his shoulders heavy, his jaw tight, and sat beside her on the low couch. Minhee, he whispered, his voice trembling, not with softness, but with restraint. They will not stop until you yield. She turned to him, her eyes wide, her lips parting in disbelief. Shield? Jungkook, you cannot mean. But his hands found hers, gripping it as though to steady himself. I mean, you must apologize to her. The words tasted bitter even as he spoke them, and he could not meet her eyes. When his heart clenched as though pierced by blade, apologize to Lady Hyun for what crime when she had done nothing but exist? It cracked as she whispered. You know, I did not do this. You know, I would never harm her. Jungkook's face twisted with anguish, his free hand raking through his ear, his voice breaking as he murmured, I know, Minhee, I know. But this is not about truth anymore. It is about peace. It is about silence. If you bow once, if you speak words you do not mean, then the whispers will end. They will stop framing you. The ministers will be silenced. The queen will be recovered. Her pride, I beg you, just this one. His voice faltered, for every word felt like a betrayal of his hurt. But he was a king, and the weight of the crown demanded sacrifice. Tears blurred Minhie's vision as she pulled her hands away, her chest heaving with the pain of it. So you would have to humiliate myself for her comfort? You would have me confess to in why I do not feel, to crimes I did not commit, simply to make the court content? Her words trembled with both rage and heartbreak. Jungkook reached for her again, desperation in his eyes. It is not forever, it is a gesture. Do this for me, Minhee, for us, so that they cannot tear us apart with their lies. But the request cut deeper than any blade, for it was not only the court who doubted her now. It was her king, her beloved, the man who should have defended her until his last breath. She turned her face away, her tears slipping hot down her cheeks, her voice breaking as she whispered, "If you cannot defend my truth, then what is left of us?" Yet the next morning, the summons came. The court gathered in the great hall, Lady Huon declining, weak and pale upon a cushioned seat, her eyes sharp despite the tremor of her hands. Minister lined the sides, courtier waiting eagerly for the drama to unfold. And to that hall walked Minhi, dressed in the plain white of humility, rather than the silks she once wore her. Face composed, though her heart screamed. Jungkook sat upon his throne, his crown heavy upon his head, his expression a mask of stone that hid the torment inside. The air was suffocating with anticipation as Minhee approached, each step echoing against the marble floor. She stopped before the queen, lowered herself to her knees, and pressed her forehead to the cold stone. Her voice, clear and steady despite the tears burning behind her eyes, filled the hall. "I beg forgiveness of Her Majesty the Queen for any shadow of jealousy that my presence has caused, and for the pain she has suffered in his palace. I swear before the gods and the king that I bear no malice, nor did I seek her harm." The words fell heavy, and the hall erupted in murmurs. To the courtiers, it was victory. To Lady Huon, it was triumph. She sat taller, her lips curving into a faint smile, her pride restored by the sight of her rival kneeling at her feet. But to Jungkook, it was agony. His fist clenched too tightly on the arms of his throne that his knuckles bled. He wanted to rise, to shout to the court that Minhee was innocent, that she needed no forgiveness for crime she had not committed. But the crown held him in palace, the weight of duty crushing the man beneath the king. His eyes burned as he forced himself to remain still, his heart shattering with every word that left Minhee's lips. And Minhee herself, though she rose with dignity once the queen had nodded coldly in acceptance, felt the fracture inside her widen, a crack that no love, no promise could easily mend. For she had been forced to bow, not to the queen, not to the court, but to a cruel truth that in this palace love was always the first sacrifice upon the altar of power. The night when the hall emptied, and the whispers carried away into the dark, Jungkook found Minhee alone, sitting by the window with her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He knelt before her, the king who knelt for no one, his voice raw as his whisper, "Forgive me." But she turned her face away, her silence heavier than any words she could have spoken, and the gulf between them stretched wider than ever before. Minhee had never felt the weight of her chains so nearly as if the days that followed her public bow. She had lowered her head not for herself, never for herself, but because the thought of her daughter growing up in a palace where her mother was despised, perhaps even exiled or executed, chilled her to the bone. It was no humiliation she had swallowed, but poison, for she had done it to protect the small beating heart that slept inside her each night, the child who carried Jungkook blood and her own fragile hope. In the silence of her chambers, when her daughter clutched her fingers in tiny fists, Minhee reminded herself that love was not always roses. It was thorns bleeding quietly so the blossoms could survive. Yet the wound of her forced apology festered, and though she never spoke a word of it to Jungkook, her eyes no longer lit up. When sometimes he entered the room, her smile no longer bloomed as it once did. She carried herself with composure of a woman resigned to her palace, but inside the fire of her spirit dimmed. Lady Huon, on the other hand, rose like a phoenix from ashes,
The very scene that had left her vomiting violently at the banquet now served as a ladder to higher ground. She played the victim with masterful precision, letting her pale cheeks and weakened body draw sympathy from the court. She received ministers in her chambers, speaking to them softly of gratitude for their loyalty, dropping veiled remarks about how fragile the peace of the court could remain, and the kingdom would be if jealousy were allowed to fester unchecked. She painted herself as a long suffering queen, the wronged wife, the one who endured humiliation with grace, while a concubine basked in stolen affection. Ministers who had once murmured discontent now pleaded themselves to her cause. For aligning with the queen meant aligning with the power of her noble family, whose influence stretched deep into the kingdom. With each passing day, her smile grew sharper, her gaze colder, her ambition burning brighter beneath the mask of frailty. Jungkook saw some of it. He was not blind to Hyun's cunning, nor deaf to the shift in the minister's tone, but he was trapped in a tightening net. He had always stood firm against pressure, but now he found himself caught between two storms. His mother and the ministers urging him to see reason, to consider that Minhe's jealousy might indeed have reached dangerous depths, and Minhe herself, who remained silent, her dignity wrapped around her like armor. The silence was the hardest part. Once Minhee would run to him with her fears, her joys, her sorrows. Now she sat quietly with their daughter, answering his question with soft notes, her voice steady but distant.
It was not anger he felt from her, but withdrawal, and it pierced him more deeply than any outburst would have. He wanted her to cling to him, to insist upon her innocence as she once had, to cry into his chest and demand that he trust her. Instead, she bore the accusations with quiet resolve, as though she had accepted her role as a shadow in his life. This quiet strength meant to protect their daughter had an united consequence. It left room for doubt. In the recesses of Jungkook's mind, where the poison of whispers had been dripping day after day, tiny cracks began to form. Why did she remain so silent? Why did she accept humiliation without protest? Was it noble sacrifice or was it guilt? Was it resignation or was it the calm of a woman who had nearly succeeded and would try again? He loathed himself for thinking it, yet the crown had taught him that doubt was the only armor a ruler could wear. The burden of kingship pressed upon him, smoothing the man who was loved with unshakable uncertainty. Hyun saw those cracks and struck at them with precision. She would speak innocently in Jungkook's presence, her voice her voice laced with sorrow. But every time she speaks, I do not wish to cause trouble for His Majesty, but I still wake in the night, remembering the pain, the poison burning through me. Sometimes I wonder if I will ever feel safe again within these walls. Her eyes would glisten with unshed tears, and the ministers, ever eager to please, would murmur their assurances. It is natural, Your Majesty, they would say, to fear that jealousy runs deep. We cannot ignore such dangers. And though Jungkook would dismiss them with a wave, their words lingered like smoke in his lungs when he noticed the change in him. His visage grew shorter, his gaze sometimes clouded with hesitation. He still held their daughter with tenderness, still brushed his lips against Minhy's hair when he thought she slept. But in the daylight, his eyes carried questions he never noticed. The warmth between them cooled, replaced by the chill of unspoken things. She endured it with grace, because to confront him might draw suspicion tighten around her, and above all, she could not endanger their child. But in the privacy of her heat, sorrow gnawed on at her, whispering that love once fractured might never be made whole again. The palace itself seemed to shift with the current of lies. Servants who once greeted Minhi with respect now offered her shallow bows, their eyes darting away. Ministers grew bolder in their favoritism of Hyon, praising her resilience, hinting at her suitability to guide the kingdom's women. Even Jungkook's parents visited Hyon often, speaking loudly of her virtue and her worth as queen while pointedly ignoring Minhe's existence. The hall that had once echoed with the music of Minhe's laughter now rang with the cold clatter of ambition and intrigue. Jungkook's torment deepened with each day. He longed to cast aside every whisper, to take Minhee into his arms and believe in her as he once had. But the crown was a merciless faith, and the world of kingship left no space for blind faith. A ruler who ignored suspicion was a ruler easily destroyed. He began to question small things, the timing of Minhee's appearance at the banquet, the way she avoided looking at Hyon, the silence with which she endured accusations. They were nothing, scraps of circumstances, yet in his heart they twisted into chains of uncertainty. He hated himself for it, yet he could not stop. And so the web of lies lightened, spun up Hyon ambition, carried by the tongues of servants and ministers, and strengthened by the worthy silence Minhi had chosen for her daughter's safety. Trust was the unbreakable thread binding Jungkook and Minhee, frayed under the weight of politics and pride. And as cracks spread through that bond, the palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day when love would crumble completely beneath the pressure of the crown. The days turned colder in the palace, not because the seasons shifted, but because warmth itself seemed to bleed from the gilded walls. Minhee rose each morning with her daughter's laughter as her only light, and even that brightness was slowly being dimmed by the unseen hands of Lady Hyeon, the second wife, clever enough to smile in public and strike in shadows, knew that Minhee's greatest strength was not her beauty, nor her quiet grace, but the little girl who carried both her mother's eyes and her father's blood. If that thread could be severed, if Minhee could be deprived of the one thing that gave her heart resilience, then she would break. And so the queen wove her lies carefully, whispering to ministers, to the king's parents, to servants whose voices carried forth. She painted Minhee as an unfit mother, too frail, too distracted by jealousy, too dangerous for a child of royal blood. The girl will grow confused, she murmured to Jungkook mothers with tears balanced in her eyes. She will grow up believing her mother's station above what it truly is, and then the palace will suffer when ambition blooms where it should not. For her safety, for her future, she must be raised in a household of order, not chaos. The idea began as a whisper, but within weeks it had brewed in the council chamber. Ministers spoke of propriety, of the importance of rearing the royal child with clear understanding of her lineage and her duty, of which should be accomplished. Jungkook, weary of their constant pressure, resisted at first, declaring that his daughter would remain under his protection. But the net drew tighter around him. Even his father argued the matter in long, heavy tones until at last Jungkook found himself alone in his chambers, torn between his love for Minhee and his duty to silence the storm that brewed endlessly around them. It was then that Hyeon delivered the final blow, approaching him with downcast eyes and a voice trembling with practical fragility. I do not wish to come between father and child, she said softly, but the kingdom look upon us, and they already whisper that girl is being turned against her queen. If you let her remain, she will be hated as her mother is hated. But if she is raised in another household, she will be sheltered from his security, and one day she may return strong and untarnished. Please, my king, think of her future, not only your present comfort. Jungkook did not answer her, but the poison of her lingered in his mind, and so, one cruel morning, when he awoke to find her daughter gone, she had been taken quietly under orders signed with the royal seal to a noble household sworn to raise her as a battlefield befitted the blood of the king. When his cries tore the palace like a wounded her body collapsed on the floor as she begged the guard to bring her child back, but their faces remained stone. No plea, no scream, no flood tears could move them, for they obeyed the king's command. Jungkook did not appear to have that day, nor the next, nor the one after. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys like the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And for the more videos that you like, click the bell icon so you will get be notified for the next video. That's it for bye bye. See you soon.